Welcome to the Voices of Young People podcast, brought to you by Springtide Research Institute. In each episode, we hear directly from young people as they respond to our research and share about the issues impacting their lives. As sociologists and researchers, we see a new story unfolding for young people, one that moves beyond traditional institutional boundaries and requires careful attention to the inner and outer lives of emerging generations. At the intersection of being and becoming, it's the Voices of Young People.
Welcome to the Voices of Young People podcast. We are so delighted to bring you a brand new season. This is season 8, and I am your host, Marte Aboagye. I'm the head of community engagement at Springtide Research Institute. And this season is really special because we're going to have 12 different young people. Some are teenagers, some are young adults, and they're all going to be sharing their own stories and examples of different sacred experiences they've had. This season coincides with our new report, The State of Religion and Young People 2023, Exploring the Sacred. So today, in this first episode, we have two wonderful guests with us. One is a current intern with Springtide. I'll let him introduce himself in just a bit, as well as one of our Springtide ambassadors in the 2023 cohort. So you're in for a real treat because both of these young people, they're just a delight to know and to hear from. And we're going to be hearing their personal examples of what they find sacred, how different experiences have played out in their lives, and you'll get to know them a bit in the process. So let's let them introduce themselves. We'll have our summer intern go first.
Hey everyone, my name is Brandon W. My pronouns are he, him, his. I am 23 years old and I currently reside in sunny Southern California. Last year, I graduated from Pepperdine University, and since then, I've been interning with Springtide, working on the research team and coaching volleyball, both at the high school and club levels. In terms of hobbies and interests, I'm very big into volleyball, hence the coaching, but I'm also super interested in music, and I love going to concerts. Any sort of live music is definitely my thing. So, yeah.
I love it. Yes. Coach Brandon. Can I call you Coach Brandon with all the volleyball coaching?
Go for it.
So yeah, Brandon and I were chatting a bit before the recording today, and I learned that he's coaching both guys and girls teams for high school volleyball right now, right?
Yep.
So yeah, if you find yourself in Southern California, you might look across the stands and see Coach Brandon at work. But we love that his experience with those high school students is just making his Springtide experience that much fuller, I think, to have that day in and day out interaction. Well, we're so excited to have you today, Brandon. Let's pass it over to one of our Springtide ambassadors who's in the conversation.
Hi, everyone. My name is Diana. I'm 16 and I'm currently in Greeley, Colorado. I'm going into my junior year of high school. My pronouns are she, her. My hobbies and interests are I love reading, and just like how Brandon coaches, I love playing volleyball. It's one of my big hobbies, and also just like Brandon, I adore concerts. I find it I go to a lot, and I've been going a lot with my family and friends, and I think it's hence the sacred space conversation we're about to have. I think at the times, those spaces and that like environment of concerts is very sacred and very dear to me.
I love that. Y'all, we didn't even know we were going to find these comments. They just come out so quickly with big music fans, both super into volleyball. This is off to a great start already. Yeah, Brandon and Diana are just meeting each other actually for the first time today in this recording. So we don't even know what one another is going to share for these examples. We're all learning as we go, essentially. But thank you, Diana. Thank you, Brandon. We're really, really honored that you would share your input today. Obviously, there's no right or wrong answers. We just want to have a deeper understanding about what what young people consider sacred. So to get us started, tell us just in a few words, what are your first impressions or first thoughts when you hear the word sacred or sacred experiences?
So for me, a sacred experience is kind of like a once in a lifetime like moment, or like something that really impacted and changed the way that you view things. Like if like you experience something, it could either like change the way you view things, or it impact you in a traumatic way, or in like a very positive way.
Love it. That's really helpful. What would you say, Brandon?
Yeah. I think my first instinct, I grew up pretty religious, and so I think it's hard not to sort of immediately jump to experiences in church, talking about the divine or certain entities. I think more recently, I feel like the sacred has come to mean sort of something that's just deeply meaningful, like in a very personal way. Um, yeah, and I think for me, like that personal aspect is like really important. The fact that it's something that's like unique to me, or my experiences kind of shape what I view as being sacred. Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay. So yeah, I'm hearing they might be once in a lifetime from Diana, that they're deeply meaningful, deeply personal from Brandon. Diana, you already mentioned that concerts and live music can be a sacred thing. What else would either of you say are just what kinds of things are sacred to you?
Um, Other than concerts, which is like kind of something recently that I've experienced, my education and like my loved ones are very sacred to me. Specifically, like my education, because I find it very personal just because of where I come from. I come from Mexican. I'm a first generation student. I come from a Mexican immigrant family. And my education is something that I hold very dear to me just because it's the way that it can change my life and it can change the people around me. So that's something I hold very like dear to my heart and very sacred to me.
Beautiful.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Diana. I think things that sort of bring me back to like who I am or the things that I value tend to be the sort of things that I find sacred. So there are certain like places, like going back to Pepperdine and visiting, and certain like spots on campus, I think have become sacred to me just over the course of time. Having like I'll visit a place and I'll look back on a certain experience that I had there, and it'll be really meaningful to kind of think about, okay, the last time I was here, I had this experience, or this sort of meaningful thing happened. Whether it's like certain trails that I've gone hiking on near Pepperdine, or certain like volleyball courts maybe that I've played on, different things like that. And then music is definitely something that has become really meaningful to me, especially like in the last few years. I think what I appreciate most about music is the fact that certain songs and just melodies, I guess, can either put words to or sort of personify some of the experiences that I've had in ways that I couldn't do for myself. And so I think that's part of what makes music sacred to me. Yeah.
I love that. We know music, just like you both have said, is really key for a lot of young people, because sometimes music is just something that gets you into the right headspace to even have a sacred moment. People have, playlists they really love going to, but you both have touched on live music. So I think that's a cool example that resonates. I want to know what sort of identities, values, beliefs, those sort of core parts of who you are. They could be practices that you have. What are those sort of things that have shaped your view of what's sacred in your life? You've touched on them a bit, but can you bring up, any other character traits or aspects from your upbringing, or any other identities that are key to you?
Yeah, I can jump in here. Yeah, I think I mentioned earlier that I grew up pretty religious. I grew up in this non-denominational, more or less evangelical church. And so for a long time, sort of the way that I viewed the sacred was sort of through that lens. A lot of it had to do with kind of doing things, going to certain things, believing certain things. And I think there are a lot of things that from sort of that background that I still retain today. I think I've reappraised a lot of those values and beliefs and sort of made them my own in different ways. But I think that was definitely a huge part in sort of introducing me to this idea of the sacred, and also maybe how to engage with it. Yeah, I think another sort of experience, I guess, or something along those lines that has influenced the way that I think about or view the sacred is just interacting with people who have very different backgrounds from me. I think that's probably been one of the most beneficial things in terms of shaping how I think about or view the sacred. Kind of getting to hear other people's perceptions of the sacred or how they experience the sacred or what that kind of looks like in their lives, I think is kind of encouraged me to think about, okay, well, then maybe the sacred is not necessarily just what I had been told it was all my life, and being able to see it as a more expansive thing, perhaps, I think is one of the coolest things that I experienced at Pepperdine, kind of getting to interact with these people who had very different belief systems and value systems than me, and being able to sort of put those in dialogue with my own, I think helped me to sort of develop my own understanding of what's sacred or what I believe is sacred.
Nice. Yeah, we love those kind of conversations. That reminds me a lot of what we do in our Springtide Ambassadors program that Diane is a part of. What would you want to say from your own experiences or identities or practices, et cetera, Diana, that have shaped how you view something as sacred?
So Brandon mentioned talking to others and viewing others' perspectives on things. And for me, a very big, I'm not sure where it falls into the category of identities or beliefs, but death in the end of a life cycle is what shapes a lot of sacred experiences for me. And it's kind of what in the next following what we're going to tell our stories. That's what a sacred experience I hold for me, just because of my background of being Mexican American and having that difference in either of experiencing what it is to be Mexican and experiencing that through death is something that I hold very sacred. And it's kind of, especially hearing it from other people, not just, it doesn't matter if they're part of my community or if they're from a different background, seeing how they grieve or get through those moments is something that kind of makes my experience a bit more sacred, because I can connect it to what others are feeling and what they felt during those moments.
That's so key. And you're setting up your story so beautifully to say that. We heard in our national research on sacred experiences with young people, we often heard that grief was the place or the emotional state that was the setting for sacred experiences. It wasn't always or only grief, but that was a significant one that came up over and over again in our quantitative and qualitative research in conversations similar to this one. So yeah, Diana, I'd love to have you go first. Tell us, a story that comes up for you when you think of a specific sacred experience you've had, and feel free to walk us through every detail so we can get just the full picture of where you were, what you experienced, what sort of thoughts came up for you, etc.
So I mentioned that kind of something sacred for me is a period that changed the way I viewed life in general and the way I lived. And about 2 years ago, in 2021, in November, I experienced the death of my older cousin. He was a very important figure in my life and in my family's life. He overdosed on drugs, which is another, it changed my life and the way I lived, because I vowed to myself I would never try or, you know, I was with my family, of course. It happened it was very ironic because it happened on the Day of the Dead, which is already such a big day in like my life as a Mexican. So that already like was kind of like very impactful. It was also a week after my parents' wedding, which is another very big virtue in like my community. So at the time, I shut down for a while just because like it was the first death I ever experienced. Like obviously I had like had others around me die, but it was the first death that like was actually close to me.
Yeah.
I was coming home from school when I found out with my older sister, and it was really, at the time, it was really funny because we believed that something. My dad, he is a truck driver, and my mom, she immediately texted and she was like, "You guys need to come home now." Like, we thought we were in trouble. So when we got home and we saw everyone was like serious, we're like, okay, maybe like something happened to my dad. So when we came home and like our parents told us, like I kind of just sat there in shock, and I was like, okay, like this is serious. And I got to see, we had family in town because it was just a week after my parents' wedding. So we had family in town. So it was like a big family gathering, but kind of in the worst way possible.
Yeah.
So I got to see how like everyone around me was reacting and grieving, coping with his death. And I didn't know how to feel. And a very important moment that I remember from his death and the day I like found out he died was there's a basketball court down the street from our house, and we would always go there. So when I found out, I went to that basketball court and I kind of just sat and like really like brought it in and like, okay, like he passed away, like what now? And then a couple weeks later, after all the like process of his funeral and getting his body back to Mexico, which was where he lived and he grew up there. It was after a couple 2 weeks. It was Christmas time and it was New Year's, and we like had to kind of find a way to celebrate these like happy holidays with just a month of him dying.
Yeah.
So it was that this moment, like now I'm like, okay, like obviously I still grieve for him, but now I can look back at that moment and it changes the way I live because he lived very freely. So and he never was stuck in just the past or the future. He always lived in the present. And that's like kind of what I gained from that experience the most, because before his death, I was only focused on my future. Like I have to do this and this and this. But now, like step by step, I'm learning to just focus on the day to day, obviously still thinking about my future, but just trying to take it step by step because I know it's what he would have done. And that's like the thing I hold most sacred to me now, because it was such I guess you could say traumatic.
Yeah.
But I gained a lot of positive things from it, especially because it made me and my like family more closer because we were able to grieve about one same thing. So that's kind of like the most like the most specific experience that I can talk about.
Yeah.
When like I think of like something that's like sacred to me.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that, Diana. Something that is so personal and does carry trauma with it, like you said yourself. But that it sounds like it was very transformative through the trauma, through the ongoing grief. And what I find also interesting and noteworthy about what you shared is that it wasn't a single moment It doesn't seem like it was a single day even. It seems like it kind of carried through a season. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, definitely did. Like, because of thinking back, like, it was just after the Day of the Dead. Like, he died on November 3rd. So it was just after the Day of the Dead. We were just getting into Thanksgiving and what we're thankful for, and heading into the Christmas season and heading into the new year. And it was kind of just like a moment of like ending the year and a new beginning going into January of 2022. So like it wasn't like the perfect time for it to happen, but it like, with all like respect to him, it was like a perfect time for a new beginning for my family and for my like everyone, because his death impacted so many people.
Yeah, clearly. Yeah. Yeah. The juxtaposition of like deep grief and pain with these holidays that are usually seen as being warm and celebratory and lighthearted. Even I see and hear and feel with you that juxtaposition made for a really just, it made for a space that you could have just said, forget about it. I don't want to think about anything happy. But it sounds like you allowed yourself to hold grief in tandem with these feelings of joy, typically associated with those holidays, and that you had family and larger community to share the juxtaposition of grief and joy. That feels really significant too, that it wasn't like something you had to just figure out all alone, that you had other people to process and remember your cousin with.
Yeah, and that shapes again to the identity of hearing what others have to say, because I got to hear from so many perspectives. I got to hear from so many perspectives what they felt during their grief. So yeah, I think thinking back to that period of grief, I still obviously feel a bit of like I feel sadness towards it, but more than anything, I feel more, you could say, more like a moment of growth. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really telling. That you've said multiple times that your cousin, the way he lived his life, like impacts the way you want to live your life now, and that you're able to see that internal growth in your own life looking back. I really appreciate you sharing this story today, and thank you for honoring the memory of your cousin in this way. I think that's extra meaningful for everyone listening in. Brandon, we'd love to have you set the story for whatever sacred experience you'd like to offer. Just in the same way, give us the full picture and all the details. We'd love to hear.
Yeah, will do. First off, thank you, thank you, Diana, for sharing that part of your story with us. Yeah, that sounds, like you said, like a very sacred thing to have gone through. So thank you. Yeah, I guess I know, Marta, earlier you talked about how grief is something that sort of came across in the data and the interviews as a place where maybe sacred moments or sacred experiences emerged from. And I guess the story that I'm about to tell sort of fits in with that trope there. I'll sort of get to the sacred, I guess, moment or experience like later, but I guess to start with some context, the summer of 2021, so all of 2020, or for the latter half of 2020 and most of 2021, Pepperdine was all online. And so I was taking classes all online that school year. And so that summer, I was returning to campus for the first time to attend summer school. But I had just gone through sort of this breakup that was my first sort of real breakup. And so I was definitely not in the headspace I sort of wanted to be in coming back to Pepperdine for the first time. And yeah, the only thing sort of getting me out of bed every day was going to class, and having sort of that sense of obligation. And I was having like kind of a hard time just taking care of myself, like little things. But one thing that sort of picked up throughout the summer was, what do you know, playing volleyball. There weren't a whole lot of people on campus, but there was one individual in my class and then another individual who was just on campus working as like one of the resident directors. And so we just started playing volleyball here and there, like every other afternoon. And that sort of became something that I started looking forward to every day. And even if like the rest of the day was not enjoyable or I was having a hard time, I could always sort of look forward to the afternoon when I got to go up to the beach courts and play volleyball and sort of forget about everything else, whether it was the schoolwork or whatever emotions kind of were lingering. And I remember after each day, we would play from like 5 to 7:30 ish, and it was like summertime, and so 7:30 ish was right around when the sun would start setting. So we would finish up playing volleyball, and then I would go over to, there's like, Pepperdine has like this massive lawn basically that like overlooks the ocean, and so after we played, I would just go there, and I would vlog. I would like take a little like mini video journal more or less of kind of where things were at that day and sort of grieving the breakup and highlights of what came from that day. Usually it was just volleyball, but yeah. And so that was, I guess around that time, another big piece of the puzzle was that the breakup was very closely tied to sort of the church that I had kind of grown up going to. And at that time, sort of when the breakup happened, I started kind of reconsidering, like, is this the community that I sort of want to stick with? And so at that time, and like I'd been going to church like all my life, the same church. And so it was kind of this big moment of reckoning for me, trying to figure out like, okay, I just had this breakup that completely like destroyed me. And then I had this kind of lingering thing of like, okay, am I also going to lose kind of church as this big community that has been really important to me? And so both of those things were kind of on my plate at that point. And so both of those things I was sort of constantly wrestling with, but volleyball was sort of the thing that kind of got my mind off that and got me like to be where my feet were. And so fast forward, so that was the summer of 2021. And fast forward to this past May-ish, I had graduated in the spring of 2022. So I was now a year removed from having graduated, but I decided to attend this conference that Pepperdine was putting on. They put on this conference every year. And it's a lot of just like pastors and religion scholars who will come and do presentations. I was more there just to be back at Pepperdine because it was a place that really meant a lot to me. And I got to go there with my mom, which was also really meaningful. But it just happened to sort of coincide with my birthday. I hadn't really been thinking about that. And there were a couple of people, the usual people obviously weren't on campus. Like it wasn't a whole lot of peers because most people were on summer break or whatever. But there were a few people who were around from that summer of 2021, just like happenstance ran into them. And like everyone I played with, like they just like live, breathe volleyball. And so they were all looking to play some volleyball. And so it just happened to work out that on my birthday, we sort of did the thing that we always did that summer of 2021 and just went up to the beach courts, played some volleyball, ended right around sunset. And I remember coming back to the apartment that we were staying at afterwards and taking a shower. And I sort of had this moment of just almost like clarity looking back at sort of where I had been sort of 2 years prior. and all the emotions that had sort of been going through my mind as I was trying to navigate having broken up and then trying to figure out like what am I going to do in my relationship with this community that's been such a big part of my life. I think there were a lot of question marks about like where things were heading and whether they would turn out like for the best. And I think, yeah, I really had no idea where things were going. And I think that was like the scariest part, but sort of in that moment of clarity, it was really clear to me that like, I definitely didn't predict that this is the way that things would have turned out. 2 years later, I was just in a much better headspace, not for any reason other than kind of trying to be more present and do kind of cultivate the experience that I had playing volleyball elsewhere. So just being where my feet were. And so, yeah, I had sort of navigated both going through the breakup and then also over the course of that year, I'd also navigated sort of taking a step back from this community that had meant so much for me. And even then there was still a lot of confusion, I think, about like what was next or what would happen next. But I think being able to look back and see sort of that I'd been in a similar spot 2 years prior and that I could be at this point now where it was like, okay, like things aren't perfect, but I'm still here and I made it through that. And so I think even now, like I'm definitely in a sort of in between of not knowing exactly like my life isn't like set up and super structured at the moment. And so still sort of questioning like, okay, what is next and what is life going to look like in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years? But I think I left that sort of moment of clarity with a sense of hopefulness. Like I may not know exactly where things are headed, how they'll turn out. But I do know that I enjoy volleyball. I enjoy things that help me stay present. And so finding those things and kind of sticking with them, things that'll turn out fine. So, yeah.
Wow. Thank you, Brandon. I mean, there's something so significant about a physical space having two very different internal states, but they're anchored by the same physical space, it sounds like. And just the perspective you were granted to be like, whoa, where I was vlogging and how I was feeling are different than where I'm at now. And yes, some questions continue. It's not like life is figured out, the end, but you're able to still see how much had transpired and how much had changed from your outlook and from those relationships. A major breakup, I don't want to call it a breakup with the faith community, but still considering a separation. Can I say that? Both of the key relationships, key people, key communities that were, your people, and then they leave, or they're looking like they might be taking on a different place, maybe not the same significance that they had in your earlier years. Those are the very things we're curious about at Springtide, is like what sort of communities and people are support networks. And when you feel like those support networks are changing, sometimes by your choosing and sometimes not by your choosing, whatever the case may be, it can really, remove your bearings where you don't feel like you have the same steadying factors. So I'm curious, when you were vlogging in the earlier state, as you're processing these things more immediately, was that vlog, I'm just curious, was that for you personally, or were you uploading it somewhere?
Yeah, I think it was more for me. I think I wasn't like super explicit about it. Like, this is just for me. I vlogged definitely like for an audience, or with like an audience in mind, like people who were close to me, but I never ended up sharing them. So they were definitely more for me. But I think kind of being able to think like of an audience helped me to kind of be like, okay, these are the things that I would explain to like somebody else. And so being able to like externalize some of the things that I was like feeling and thinking as if I was like talking to somebody else, I think was really helpful at a time when it was really easy to sort of just like be thinking a lot in my head and talking a lot to
Yeah.
myself. Yeah.
No, that seems like a really healthy coping mechanism, honestly. It's like when people say Dear Diary, but like the
Right.
diary is often like an inanimate object. But here you're like, okay, if I wanted to tell this story to this friend or this group of people or this type of trusted adult or whomever it was, these are the facts or these are the feelings that I want
Right.
to convey.
Yeah.
And yet it was just for you. I was just curious about that when you were
Yeah.
walking. So, you both have shared beautiful, compelling examples. I didn't know what I was going to get. And I think it's really interesting that both of them come from places of deep pain. And what emerged, I think, for both of you was a sense of growth. Like that was the direct word that Diana used, but I don't know if you used that word exactly, Brandon, but that was the sense I got from you as well. I think there's something very, I don't know, there's some synergy in that you're both coming with distinct stories, distinct examples, definitely different times of your life. You carry different backgrounds and different identities, and yet there was something sacred you could both name that came from a place of grief or pain or asking hard questions. It wasn't just like everything's going great in my life and here's a magical sacred experience that fell into my lap. It was like things are rough and I don't know how I feel about them and I'm processing them, and out of that, when you look back, you name those places of asking hard questions, processing grief, processing pain or trauma. You are naming that as sacred, and I think that's something. It's giving me pause to think about my own life. And for anyone listening, whether it's a young person, in our age demographic of 13 to 25-year-olds, or if it's some sort of adult mentor or leader who's like, I want to support young people. Here are two examples, two stories from Brandon and Diana where, they were processing hard things on their own. And I bet there are people in your own life who are going through their own dark season of the soul, whether that comes from the death of a family member, whether that comes from a hard breakup or loss of an important community. Those things need support still. They need people to come alongside to be family, to be friends, to be mentors. Diana, I hear that you had those sort of people, when you said my family was there with me. Brandon, even if your vlog was just for you, you were like, here's what I would want these figures in my life to know. I just want our audience to take pause to think of like, who are the people in their own lives that might be having some similar experiences, whether they know about it or not, but that could use extra support, could use extra accompaniment in those places of hard questions and wrestling. And I love, that you both can look at the other side and be like, there was something really sacred in that. Or Brandon, yours was like a full 2 years later, it sounds like, but being able to be like, this is a sacred moment to now have the vantage point in this same physical space.
Can I ask Brandon something about his story?
Sure, go for it.
So kind of like the vlogs, obviously that's honestly really smart to be able to cope with that. But were those two peers that you played volleyball with kind of like, I wouldn't say key, but were they a moment of like growth for you as well? Because you playing volleyball with them and like from experience, playing volleyball with a group of people it's honestly for me, it's very moving because I like playing in teams. But like were those two peers that you played with like kind of like like a path for you for this like moment of growth through your like breakup and all of that, and like what like kind of like helped you answer like the questions you were feeling. Like, I don't know if this is making sense, but yeah.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. And thanks for that question. It's definitely something I was thinking about. I think those people were like, I see those people as being like very central characters in my story. Like they didn't really know all that much about like what I was going through outside of like volleyball, which I think was in a way like helpful, in the sense that like, oh, these people, like I don't come to these people to talk about like these things because I spend enough time like thinking about these things outside of this. And so to have a space where I could sort of just not think about everything else, and know that I didn't have to think about anything else other than just playing volleyball, I think was really important, because being able to like show up to this one space to do this one thing where I was just kind of free to not think about everything else, I think it sort of reminded me that like, okay, I don't always have to be occupied with these thoughts or these emotions. Not that being occupied with our thoughts and emotions is necessarily a bad thing, but I think for me, it was getting to a point where I was like, okay, this is not super helpful. And so I think those people, like, regardless of whether or not they feel like they were super important, I definitely look back on those experiences and I'm like, wow, like you have no idea how big a role you played in me being able to sort of like get out of this slump, or sort of view this slump differently. Yeah.
That's a good question, Diana. And I appreciate the added information you gave, Brandon, because I think it's significant that a physical activity that you love so much that you do pretty much daily, whether you're coaching or playing yourself, is maybe every day. It's not you wouldn't classify it as a sacred experience.
Sure.
And yet this thing that has such regular cadence in your life still was the place or a part of this, the story that you gave us as what you deem as sacred. I think that's significant.
Definitely.
It makes me think of the place of ritual, that things that we do daily. Maybe it's reading a book. I know Diana's a big reader, lighting a candle, a certain prayer, a certain practice that you do with regularity. Sometimes it just feels like you're going through the motions, and yet sometimes ritual can have a place of ushering in sacred. We actually have a section in the report that I mentioned, the State of Religion and Young People 2023, Exploring the Sacred, that is about ritual, from one of our research advisors, Kershat. He brings a beautiful contribution of just what are different things you can do to create ritual in your life, because not everyone has rituals that they feel like they can fall back on. So I'm wondering, for both of you, do you think sacred experiences are something that you can create, a sacred moment? Could you create a sacred moment or sacred experience if you wanted to? Or do you think it can't be created? It needs to just more happen organically. I'd love to hear any of your thoughts on this.
Yeah, actually, I think what you just said about sort of ritual, I feel like has a lot to do with this. Like I think I think that people can live their lives in such a way that sort of almost predisposes them to be experiencing like more sacred moments. But I definitely don't see it as like, okay, like I wake up, I decide I'm going to have a sacred moment today, and I sort of just like make it happen very formulaically. But I think when we, I don't know, I think when we live our lives kind of aligned with our values, then I think it kind of creates opportunities or spaces for sacred experiences or sacred moments. Yeah.
Kind of creating the conditions.
Yeah,
Would that
exactly.
be a fair way to put it? Okay.
Yeah. And I think ritual can be a big part of that.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. What would you say, Diana?
I agree with Brandon, but I also think like life itself is sacred, just because like everything you do can become a sacred moment. Like, and like we can have like a moment, like I could say like right now, this, like that could be like a moment of like, oh, this is like sacred. Because I think we can create sacred moments without realizing it.
Mm.
And like, again, like it could happen naturally because obviously, like Brandon said, like I'm not gonna wake up, like I could say like in 2 weeks and I'm like, I'm gonna make this a sacred moment. Like this is gonna be like, because I think with like that purpose of making it sacred, it kind of loses its meaning. Because for me, like my sacred moment, it happened to me when I like did not expect it at all, but it led to me like improving and growing as a person. So like that, I feel like a sacred, not for it to be a sacred moment, it has to happen when you least expect it. But a big moment of it is like kind of like that element of surprise. So
Hmm.
I would say it has to come like more organically, and it like obviously like anything you do can create a sacred moment, but you can't like purposely do it for it to become a sacred moment.
Yeah, I get that. I totally get that. And I mean, what you said at the beginning of that response, that, life itself is sacred, and it sounds like sometimes it's about what you notice.
Mm-hmm.
Because like sacred is happening. Are you going to pay attention? I guess you could say. That's one of the things we have, described in this report as well, is how you can develop a sacred sensibility. So if the sacred, however people want to define that, is indeed happening already, how can you have eyes or ears or whatever senses you want to say to pay attention to what's around you? So I think both of your examples, you did both have to pay attention. You had to dial in a certain way to be like, what's happening here is different, or it's significant, and I want to be attuned to this, to notice this place of connection, or this place of growth, or this place of community, or this place of belonging, whatever those experiences were. You both offered them in really stunning ways. I think your stories are going to hit home for so many people listening. I'm wondering, as we wrap up, if there's anything else that you just think I should know about, our audience should know about, when it comes to sacred moments or helping other young people experience the sacred.
I was kind of hearing from like Brandon's story and hearing what he had to say. I was kind of thinking of like most of the moments that I hold, like that I think are sacred in my life, are all moments of growth. So I think like those, like that growth itself and improving yourself is sacred, as like whole, like growth is such like a sacred thing. Because for me, the growth was overcoming my cousin's death. For Brandon, his growth was finding like this answer to this like question of like his breakup and like his questioning with his church. So I think like growth itself is extremely sacred, at least for me. And I think like hearing from like these, like we said earlier, like hearing perspectives of other people, like that is a value that we hold to what we think is sacred. So I think that kind of like confirms it to me way more. So I think people like, and also like hearing like these, like all of this, like I'm thinking of a lot of moments in myself that were very impactful. And if I consider those sacred moments, so I think like kind of like to wrap it up, like I think growth itself is extremely sacred.
Thank you. Thank you, Diana. Brandon, any last thoughts from you?
Yeah. I think as I was thinking about this question, I know Marta, you and I talked a little bit earlier about Ted Lasso before we hopped on the recording here. But I think a thought that came to mind is just this idea of being curious and not judgmental. I think that's a huge, huge thing as I look back at like my own experiences. I think it's like from my vantage point, like it's easy to kind of like look at another person or somebody maybe younger than me and be like, Yeah, that's not, I don't think that's the sacred. When I feel like the sacred is definitely like a deeply personal thing. I know I talked a little bit about that in sort of my definition of the sacred or whatever. And so I think like almost like the worst thing that we can do is sort of be a killjoy, as young people are sort of exploring what they think the sacred is or what that means or what that looks like for them. Telling them like, hey, like that's not quite it, or like things like that. I think can be, um, I think can kind of stunt things a little bit. Whereas I think giving young people sort of the security to know that like, okay, and just like asking questions and letting them sort of explore, I guess, for themselves and seeing where that leads them, I think it can be really meaningful. I know that's been really helpful for me, kind of as I was like wrestling with my relationship with the church, sort of that I grew up in. It was finding people who gave me permission to be like, okay, like maybe there are other spaces out there that feel like a better fit or are more aligned sort of with my values. But it wasn't until I sort of found people who like felt safe enough giving me permission to be able to do that, that I was like, okay, let's explore this and set out. Yeah, there were, yeah.
Be curious and not judgmental. Such a good note to end on, but I love the way that you wove that into your own story. Thank you for getting our season started. We're excited to keep bringing more of these partner conversations where we have two different young people. They might be from different states and different, seasons of life like these two. They might be more similar or more different, but whatever it is, we want to have two distinct examples in each episode. So thanks again for getting us started, and we'll be back next week with another episode.
Awesome. Thanks, Marta.
Thank you.
Visit springtideresearch.org to hear more voices of young people and to learn about the latest research and resources available, along with the State of Religion and Young People 2023, Exploring the Sacred. Springtide Research Institute is dedicated to listening to young people and sharing critical research and actionable insights from what we learn. Visit our website to find ways to support our work and discover ways that we can support yours. Be sure to follow us on social media at We Are Springtide and join the conversation by using the hashtag Exploring the Sacred. Today's show was produced by Marta Aboagye. The audio was mixed by Andy Palmer with original music created by student Christian Unthink. Special thanks to the 12 guests featured in Season 8 and to all the young people whose perspectives and insights make our research possible. Thanks for listening.